Hello once again, and we are live remote, this time from Albany, New York, and the New York State Publishers Conference. I hope that I'll have a guest in a moment, but right now we're going to be going right to the people who make this all possible every week on the New York State, the Greater Western New York State of Greater Western New York Report. Well, we're a bit flummoxed here today, but that's not to take anything away from our sponsor.
Each week, our community makes history. Each week, you make history. And each week, there's only one source to turn to for the first take on history. You know what that is? Subscribe to the Sentinel right now to discover the history being made in your own backyard.
The Mendon Honeoye Falls Lima Sentinel. More than just your news, it's your history. Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report. Join us each episode as we discuss fantastic topics ranging from history to science to the strange and the wonderful, as well as the treasured spirit with which our region has infused America. We challenge you to consider all things Greater Western New York, from our region's very beginnings to how it inspires, how it empowers, and why it is so admired. Here's the host of the State of Greater Western New York Report, Chris Carosa.
Hi there, and how are we doing today? I'm here live from Albany, New York, where the New York State Press Association publishers are having their annual conference. We'll have a publisher on with us in a moment as soon as he arrives. It's a bit of a rainstorm here and things are delayed, but in the meantime, let's go over some of the things that occur at a conference like this. Each year, the New York State Press Association holds an annual conference. That includes everybody, the editors, the reporters, the publishers, the owners, everybody comes in the spring. They give their Better News Awards out at that time, and they also have a number of training sessions so that the newspapers can print things that are more relevant and more exciting, more enticing to the readers. That's in the September timeframe. No, I'm sorry, that's in the March timeframe, or thereabouts. In the September timeframe, just the publishers get together. What's the difference between, say, a publisher and an editor and a reporter? These are different elements in the newspaper business that really helps craft the paper to what we see each day. You're probably most familiar with reporters. Reporters are the folks who go out there and write about the news. Now, what is news? There's different types of news. There's breaking news. Breaking news is the kind of news where you see the reporter live at the event. Like right now, this could be considered breaking news because I'm live at the event. Breaking news. The State of Greater Western New York Report is on live right now here in Albany, New York. That would be breaking news. Spot news is when the reporter goes to the event after it occurs and says the event happened here. So, for example, if I were to show up an hour later after this show is done, I would say, well, whoever you are I'm talking to, about an hour ago at this very place, the State of Greater Western New York Report was remotely broadcast right from this room. So that's more spot news. General news coverage is just something that is a much more fuller sort of thing. Doesn't have any analysis, keeps the who, what, why, where, and when. I could be in the other room and I would say, well, I wouldn't be from the other room. Let's say I'm from the studio. Let's do it for this week. Let's give you the example based on where I was last week. The general news coverage would have said the State of Greater Western New York Report was broadcast live from Buffalo, New York last week at the American Association of State and Local History, their annual conference. So that would be just regular news. Now, if you want to get into analysis, or if you want to get into something fun and exciting, maybe something that isn't even current news, then that would be a feature. So a feature could be about current news, but it will have much more in-depth analysis. That's where you interview people, you start to connect the dots for the reader. You don't tell the reader what to think, but you are doing some analysis through the people that you're interviewing and through some other evidence that might come up that would make the story more interesting. Obviously, when you write about older things, like historic things, that's going to be a feature because it's not really news, it's not current. And really only makes sense to write about if you've got something in terms of the analytical end of things that makes the story more interesting. Now, this is where you start kind of blending news and opinion within the features section. If it's pure opinion, then it becomes an op-ed, an editorial. And this is very confusing because in newspaper language, everything that's text is called editorial. And it's not editorial in the sense that you know what editorial is. It's just really a synonym for text. But what I'm talking about in terms of op-eds, that's what you're talking. That's what you recognize on the op-ed page. It's people just giving straight opinion. They'll extract facts, but they'll probably only present the facts that they think are relevant to the opinion that they're making. And then obviously the other things in newspapers are going to be comics, advertising, that sort of thing. So that's what for the most part reporters and editors will be involved with. Reporters are out in the field or collecting the data, writing the story. The editors are the ones who kind of hone the craft, hone the edges of the story so that it is the best it could possibly be when it goes out to the reader. Yes, they're going to maybe mark up some words. Maybe they'll twist the headlines in a certain way because the editors probably know more about headline writing than the reporters. Not all the time, but if you're a publisher, you want editors who are pretty good at headline writing because we all know that that's the first thing that people see. You want to know what the second thing that people see? It's the picture that goes with the story. And you want to know the third thing that people read or see? It's the caption in the picture. So those three elements, the headline, the picture, and the caption, are often the things that really draw the reader in before they even get to the writing of the reporter. This really probably could upset reporters who think that the writing is really the kernel of what the story is all about, and it is. It really is. But the writing is in a vacuum if readers don't read it. So you have the editors who are working with the reporters. On top of the editors, you have the publishers. Now, the publisher may or may not be interested or even have an eye for what's actually put in the paper in terms of formatting or headlines or pictures or anything like that. A good publisher will have some sense for what the product should be from an artistic standpoint. But the best publishers really focus in on the numbers. The numbers are the readers, the numbers are the advertisers, the numbers are all the things that you expect the numbers to be. And the publisher really handles the business end of the newspaper. So you can see the differences between the two conferences. In the spring conference, it's really more the art of the craft. Writing, headlines, pictures, these are where the awards are given. And those are the awards that you would kind of recognize because, hey, that's a great picture, or hey, that's a great story. That's in March. I keep calling it September. I'm getting fall and spring mixed up. In March, that's what you're doing, the art of the craft. In September, when the publishers get together, they talk about the science of the craft. What is the science of the newspaper business? What drives people to read the newspaper? What drives advertisers to advertise in the newspaper? What sort of competition is out there? What is the current trend in technology or technologies, in platforms? All these are the sort of questions that the publishers ponder. For example, this very media that we're using, we're a newspaper. We're primarily a newspaper. That means we print things. So why are we doing videos? Well, we're doing videos. This is just one example. We have other examples that we do on a regular occasion. And it's because it's just another way of bringing the readers in. A lot of times what happens when we do this particular show, we may come up with a news story, especially when we're sponsoring, say, a town hall meeting. We're generating news in the story itself. And by the way, that's going to be coming up again. The next Greater Western New York Town Hall meeting is scheduled for October 12th. If you want to attend, you'll be able to listen to candidates, answer questions that are relevant to the Western New York region, and then you'll get to say whether or not you want to endorse any of those candidates. You don't have to endorse anybody, but you'll be given that option. That's October 12th. So that generates news through this sort of format. The other types of shows that we'll do at our paper is every week we interview the mayors and supervisors in the towns and villages that we cover. Yes, that's a video like this, and it's produced and you can watch it, but more important, the transcript of that is printed in the newspaper every week. So that, what kind of news is that? That's going to be more like general news. Here's the facts of what they say. It's not really an event. It's not spot. You're not talking about the event itself. You're just reporting what the people said at the event. And the third major type of broadcast that we do is live sports broadcasting. We've got one of those coming up in a couple of days. It's primarily football because it seems like that's what everybody likes to watch. So we do that, and people watch it. In fact, that is probably the third most watched thing that we've ever had has been a football broadcast. And those are consistently watched at very high levels. People watch more of that, say, than they'll watch the mayors and supervisors report, even though it's the same community. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Obviously, the football game generates a news story. And it doesn't really come from the video. The video and the news stories are generally created separately, but they complement each other. And it's a good way of really attracting a much wider audience, because some people like to read, some people like to watch, some people like to listen. So I guess you got all those covers, all three sort of sensory news sensors, individual news sensors. So that's kind of what goes on in the newspaper business in general, and it's the publishers who drive this strategy going forward to see where we're headed as newspapers and where we've been and what sort of pressures we have on us to get things done. It's a bit of a challenge, obviously, in today's environment where there's a lot of competition for newspapers. People just really don't want to read a paper, that is. They'd love to read it on their device. It's a little bit more than that, though, and you're seeing it particularly now. The costs of delivering print news continue to go up fairly dramatically, and that really puts a lot of pressure on newspapers. You've got to get advertisers in order to support the newspaper. You can't do it on subscriptions. In fact, most subscriptions, a lot of times, subscriptions are loss leaders. You need to have subscriptions. There's actually psychological reasons why subscriptions are more important than, say, giving the paper away for free. There's also business reasons why you want to do that. But subscriptions are important. They just don't really answer the question on how to sustain the costs, the ever-increasing costs of printing and delivering a newspaper. Well, we've got our guest in, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a break here. We're going to go to commercial, and then we'll come back with our guest.
Through the mists of time, nature and man have both created and buried treasures beyond the imagination. With the ages, these riches slowly dissolve into mere myths until they are forever forgotten. But there are those brave souls who tirelessly cling to the truth, ever seeking to discover the undiscovered, to reveal what has always been there, to uncover the hidden gems of a land thought forsaken but loved by millions. 50 Hidden Gems of Greater Western New York. Discover the secrets in your own backyard. Buy your copy now at 50hiddengems.com.
Welcome back. You're here on the State of Greater Western New York Report, and with me right now is George Fiala of the Red Hook Revue. He's from Brooklyn, New York. He's one of the publishers that are here at the conference today. George, let's just give us a live mic check, just because we didn't do that before.
Hello, I'm happy to have made it in the pouring rain coming from Brooklyn.
All right. So you're coming through very good. So you see this little green bar here? It means you could raise your voice a little as you talk so that everyone can hear you as clearly as it can. Let me
Right.
just check and see where your mic is.
Check.
You could probably put the mic a little up bit higher to your mouth. So as George is doing that, again, George's paper is in Brooklyn. So George, tell us a little bit about how you got started in the business. How did you end up being publisher of a newspaper?
Well, if we go back to the beginning, I was originally a disc jockey back in the early 70s when they had something called progressive rock radio. But progressive rock radio didn't really last as a genre of radio, except for some of the college stations. So I ended up deciding that I want to stay in media, so I worked for a small newspaper in Pennsylvania. Then I came to New York, worked for a bigger paper in Brooklyn. That's how I got actually introduced to the New York Press Association. And then I wanted to have my own business, so I actually did a mailing company. And I run a mailing company in Brooklyn. But about 10 years ago, or 12 years ago now, I said, you know what, I should go back to something I really like also. And I started this paper all by myself.
All by yourself.
Yes.
Well, you'll be happy to know that I started life in the media world as a disc jockey also on the AM radio, AM side, when they used to play music. But not progressive, though, just old-fashioned rock and roll. So, George, from your standpoint, now you're in a very, I'll say, a densely populated market. Remember, our audience here is primarily the greater Western New York region, not as populated as Brooklyn. I remember Welcome Back, Kotter. They went through and they showed the Brooklyn sign. They said it was the third or fourth biggest city in New York.
Yeah.
You never thought of that. You always, when you're from Western New York, you think, well, Brooklyn and New York City, it's the same thing. But it's really a separate city. So what are the challenges in your kind of environment? You have a lot of people there, a lot of potential readers, but you probably also have a lot of competition.
Well, you have the thing about Brooklyn, most cities actually, is that in order to get enough advertising to support a going publication, especially a weekly publication, it's difficult to get a lot of advertising from a small area, which when I say small, it could be 15,000 people. But this Brooklyn itself is 4 million. So what happens is that newspapers, and now websites even, get together and publish editions of one paper. So they'll put out so and so many copies in one neighborhood, so and so many copies in another neighborhood, and then they'll sell advertising based upon which neighborhood. The problem with that sometimes is that the stories are really not that much about that particular neighborhood. The editorial copy is for all the papers. You know, there are might be a few one local page or something, but it's not like in a town in upstate New York where you have one paper covering one area, covering one town hall or city hall. You know, the news is local. In New York City, there's a lot of local news, and it's difficult to have a paper support itself just by having local news in, let's say, my area, which is maybe 12,000 people.
Do you find that papers in your area really narrow down their market so that it's just a thin sliver of the entire region? Or do you try to do the shotgun approach and attract as many readers as possible?
No. First of all, the papers that I compete with are all free newspapers, as is mine. And it depends on where you leave them and what your editorial content is. And what I was saying was that my paper has the name of the neighborhood in the name, and the stories are all local, pretty much, except for our cultural content, which is more broad-based. The news is strictly for those 12 or 14,000 people. Whereas a big chain that operates 20 different papers in Brooklyn will have maybe the same story in a much larger area, like maybe 150,000 or 250,000, even though they'll have like 5 papers within that area.
So the analogy here in the Western New York region is community newspapers. You're, in essence, a community newspaper, as opposed to, say, a broader metropolitan newspaper. And I'll tell you that we've experienced something similar to what you're talking about until they closed them all down, where there was a newspaper publisher that was buying up the newspapers, national publisher, and really stripped away the local content and substituted the same content, even though they were serving different communities. And those papers really lost viewers. And then in the end, they ended up giving away for free, even though they had a subscription price associated, but now they're all shut down.
Yeah, New York had that. The New York Post actually bought a few papers and got rid of them. I know in Westchester County, Gannett, which is a big national newspaper chain, did the same thing as what you're talking about, and it didn't work.
So here's something that I think our listeners are kind of interested in, and that is, you're from Brooklyn, downstate. We're from the western portion of the state. When you think of Western New York, what do you think of?
Well, I can't speak for too many of my readers. I think, of course, everybody will think of the Niagara Falls and Buffalo when they watch football. But to be honest, I mean, I used to myself go to the Finger Lakes. I enjoy that area, which is kind of central, I guess, right?
Well, no, Finger Lakes are part of Western New York. There's a historic division that sort of splits the Finger Lakes, half in Western New York, half in Central New York. But the Finger Lakes region has really been trying to tout itself as one tourist sort of region. So it's generic. So it depends where you went on the Finger Lakes. And if you went on the western side, then it's Western New York. If you went on the eastern side, then it's Central.
I will say this. What I see about people who live in New York City is they don't really understand that there is the rest of the state. You know, they'll have a country house maybe in the Hudson Valley, but the politics of it is that people in New York City, many of us don't understand the conservative politics of, say, parts of Western New York. People were very upset when the mayor of Buffalo ran as a write-in and won against a woman that woman who ran against him, who was a Democratic Socialist, I believe. People in Brooklyn would have loved her. So they don't understand that. But then it was a big story for a few days and then not at all.
Yeah, I mean, that was an interesting campaign. It might have been the first time anything like that happened. But it's also, if you look at the politics of it, not so much the politics of it, but the marketing of it, this is an issue that everybody always has with primaries. It's not an issue that necessarily needs to be solved, by the way. It's just not a lot of people go and vote in primaries. And as a result, sometimes you'll get the candidates that motivate the voters that don't necessarily represent the broader amount. I think that's probably what happened in Buffalo. Now, our paper doesn't cover Buffalo, so I'm reading the news just like you when it comes to that. But it's interesting that that you guys were even noticing what was going on in Buffalo. I wouldn't have guessed it.
Well, she had a big fundraiser in New York that I almost went to, but then I had something else to do.
So, you know, the weird thing about that is that's probably not something that you want to make people in Western New York aware of. There is a concern, I think, that you have too much influence, say, from New York City, that might have a problem in terms of Western New York. So, if you're a political figure, you can't say no to money if you're getting it from New York City, but I wouldn't make a big deal about, say, going to New York to do the fundraiser.
Well, it happened, and I'll say another thing that's a local issue is the idea of having. We have community boards. The closest we get to a local government in Brooklyn, in New York City, is our community boards, and they cover maybe 3 or 4 communities each. And since the pandemic, they've been having all their meetings on Zoom. These are meetings I used to cover. I used to go to all the meetings, all the committee meetings. You get to meet your neighbors, meet your friends, because you talk to them after the meeting. You get other stories by that way too. But as soon as the pandemic started, everything went to Zoom. They had no live meetings anymore because the governor signed a law that said that could be. And I think everybody's gotten used to the idea that they're doing public service, or community service, by going on their computer at night while they're doing the dishes or while they're cooking dinner, or maybe they shut their screen off, but it seems like they're there. So actually, the governor, this last, which is the state, state government, didn't extend that. So our local community board has to actually have a live meeting, and they're not very happy about it. And all of a sudden, they think, why should us in Brooklyn have to do what the governor wants? And I even heard somebody talking about more home rule and things like this. But the fact is, I actually think it's a great thing that there are some limits to the particular kinds of things that happen locally. Sometimes things are local or great, but sometimes there needs to be, a more general way of doing things.
I think it's interesting that you bring up home rule, because that's certainly an issue that keeps popping up in the various communities in the greater Western New York region. So we have town hall meetings, the 17 westernmost counties, which, by the way, are sponsored by a dozen or more of the community newspapers in that region. And this home rule issue really came up twice. The last two town hall meetings, that issue came up in different forms. So it's interesting that you're seeing the same thing. I think there is agreement that you do need to have. It's good to have some consistently broad-based rules. On one hand, on the other hand, you do want to give people a chance to.
But I once did an interview with a state assembly representative, and I couldn't really understand exactly everything he was telling me, because I'm not hugely into the political methodologist, but he seemed to stress the fact that his job was to take all different rules all over the state and bring them together, so that if you're driving on a highway and this was a while ago, when you're talking on the cell phone in one county where it could be okay, and then you go to the next county and it's not allowed, you have to bring those rules all together for certain things, which makes sense to me.
I want to just remind you, we have a couple minutes left, literally just a couple of minutes. If you have a question that you want me to ask George, feel free to put it in the chat, and I'll ask it. This is obviously only for the people who are watching this live. So George, if you had to, I guess, think of one thing other than Niagara Falls and the Finger Lakes that you mentioned already, one thing that you would use to describe the greater Western New York region, what would that be?
I mean, all I could say is state parks and nature. That's what we think of when we think of going outside of our city. And I always tell people, I said, you could find anything you want in New York State. I mean, both governors put that in advertising, but it's true. It's like, you don't have to go to the south, you don't have to go to the west, you don't have to go to the north. Everything's in New York State. It's a great state. I spend more time on the, the part that's opposite Vermont.
Yeah.
But still, I've been to Canada through New York State.
Vermont, you mean eastern New York?
Right, but the Southern Tier is a great road. I found the Finger Lakes by going on a highway back. It's like the most beautiful sights that I saw was around the lakes.
We did have somebody ask a question, maybe more for an elaboration. The issue that came up when the governor issued the edict that generated the interest in home rule. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Because there's concerns that maybe the governor went a little bit too far in making this unilateral, quote unquote, law, which really they couldn't do. Our governors are not supposed to do unless emergency powers are granted. So tell us a little bit about that reaction in your own local community and what the concern was.
Okay, my reaction was, this is all from the district manager of that community board. And I asked him, I said, so what are you hearing? And they all said, he told me, he said, everybody's telling me that how dare the governor do this to us? The governor shouldn't have this authority. And I said, you know what? our mayor would agree with the governor in this case. Well, whatever, because I think they've all gotten used to not having to go to meetings. And I think that's a bad thing because people are taking their democracy less seriously. You know, we can multitask to a point, but sometimes we should put all our attention to, you know, our local government.
It's interesting that the concern on, you know, in your community was the meetings law, because there's a concern in areas of Western New York too about meetings. I don't know if it's quite the same. I mean, I don't. It's, we'll have to save that question for another day when we have a guest on that's local who could kind of elaborate on that. Well, we're hitting up to our end time. George and I have to go to the actual board meeting for the publishers. So thank you all for listening and watching. Remember, if you want to participate in the live audience and ask a question the way Bob just did, then just go to our website, stateofgreaterwesternnewyork.com, and you'll be able to get the invitation every Thursday so that you'll be able to participate in these meetings and ask questions whenever you want. So with that, I want to...
Can I say one thing?
Oh, go ahead, George.
Here, this is the paper,
Oh, his paper, I forgot.
the Red Hook
Yeah.
Star Review, and if you come visit me in Red Hook, Brooklyn, you'll be right by the Statue of Liberty, and I'll give you a nice tour.
All right. Thanks a lot, George. All right, and thank you all for watching. One more thing. If you're watching this on our site, congratulations. You figured out how to get in there and watch it. If you're watching this on our Facebook page, it's there every Sunday at 1:30. It goes live. It's rebroadcast. It's not live, but you'll be able to see it if you've liked our Facebook page. It will tell you when it airs. If you don't like Facebook and prefer YouTube, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Same thing, 1:30. Now we know we have a little competition with a football game this weekend, but it's always there on the website if you want it. So that's it for this week. Bye-bye for now.